The US borrows trillions, so does Europe. But when African nations borrow, alarms go off. Why? Borrowing isn't a crime. It's what governments do. The US, $34 trillion in debt. Over 7 trillion of that is held by foreign governments. Japan, China, the UK, Belgium, Switzerland. Japan, more debt than double its GDP. Even Germany runs deficits, with public debt topping 2.6 trillion euros. Meanwhile, African countries borrow far less and pay a much higher price. Greetings, I'm Dr. Christy Agawu. I'm a researcher and a storyteller. If this content resonates, subscribe, like, and share, and let's talk in the comments. So, in Washington, a stimulus package passes in days. In Accra, a $3 billion loan takes months and creditors' approval. The US and Europe borrow more because they issue global reserve currencies that sit atop trusted financial systems. Africa, burdened by colonial legacies, weaker credit ratings, and currency risks, trigger alarm bells, even with smaller debts. Now, borrowing without sovereignty isn't borrowing, it's begging. Because this isn't just about numbers, it's about power and trust and monetary sovereignty. Western nations borrow to build research hubs, chip foundries, and clean energy. When African nations try the same, they're told, tighten your belts. The US, EU, Japan borrow heavily and are encouraged to do so. Think COVID stimulus, climate investment, industrial policy. African governments borrowing for roads or industry, they face austerity mandates, IMF thresholds, and punishing interest rates. This isn't just about GDP or credit scores. It's about who gets the benefit of the doubt and who gets conditions. The West builds industries. In Africa, it buys chalk and vaccines. Health and education matter. There's no question about that. But they don't replace factories, ports, or chip plants. In Europe, public borrowing powers solar parks and EV assembly lines. In Africa, it barely maintains roads, often built with foreign loans. There is a quiet bias. Africa can run clinics, not chip fabs. It can manage health programs, not industrial zones. The West props up its industries with subsidies, export credits, and public banks. Africa is told, privatize, liberalize, stick to the basics. Yes, accountability matters. African states need to be accountable. They must govern well. But let us note that without room to build, to borrow and build, sovereignty is just symbolic. In the 1960s and 70s, African nations chased industrialization, just like South Korea, Taiwan, India, and Brazil, but the outcomes diverged. Asian countries got a ladder, long-term strategic aid, industrial support. Africa got lectures, conditions, and short-term fixes. Aid to South Korea and Taiwan backed steel, chemicals, electronics. African aid? Mostly stabilization, not transformation. Africa doesn't borrow too much. It just can't borrow on its own terms. That is the problem. In the 1980s, interest rates soared. Export earnings collapsed. Repayments exploded just as commodity prices crashed. Then came SAPs, structural adjustment programs. They cut subsidies, they privatized, they dismantled. And in Asia, no SAPs for South Korea, none for Taiwan. Instead, tariff protections, export banks, and national planning. By the 1990s, industry made up 30% of Korea's GDP. In Ghana, barely 10%. And Zambia lost its factory jobs in a decade. African leaders made mistakes, but so did the global system. These weren't just gaps. They were designed constraints. This isn't about blame. It's about asking, why are African states still denied the tools that others used to rise? If aid built Korea's steel mills, why not Kenya's solar panels? Let's stop asking why Africa failed and ask why it wasn't allowed to succeed. So, my good friend, until African nations can then decide what to borrow, and how to grow on their own terms with accountability and vision, we're not talking about development. We are talking about managing a broken system. So if this moved you, like and share and join the conversation. If you're curious and have a question, go ahead and ask it. Till the next time.